Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Ramadan Kareem, noble Ramadan, inshallah, may it ennoble us. Our lives are upended, which is a wonderful opportunity to think, to reflect, to be a bit more conscious, to be awakened. This is one of the countless blessings of the month. And this year, as part of these Ramadan reflections, I am sitting here in the part of the library of the Cambridge Muslim College, which over the last few months we have been shaping and reshaping, thanks to generous support from one of our donors. And a library really is like the Fort Knox of Islam. It's where we keep all of the most closely guarded treasures. For as long as the libraries are there, the Ummah's memory is intact. We don't succumb to some kind of civilizational Alzheimer's. And going through the books, looking at them, thinking about how to catalogue them, one finds countless treasures. It's very easy to be sidetracked. And we have quite a strong history collection, and a seerah collection in particular. And what I've been noticing recently is that behind the famous hadith collections and the isnads, the chains of narrators which begin each hadith, with all of those names, sometimes we forget that those were great names, luminous names to the hadith scholars and to the Muslims of the early generations. And it's really helpful to look at those people to see who they were. So what I'd like to speak about today, or the person whom I would like to discuss today, is one figure that we sometimes see in the isnads, which is a lady scholar, and she is from the generation of the Tabi'in. So that's going to be the theme this Ramadan, female Tabi'i scholars. And for those of you who don't know, amongst the early Muslims, somebody who actually had the privilege of seeing the Holy Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, is called a Sahabi, a companion. Somebody who saw one of the Sahaba but didn't see the Holy Prophet is considered to be Tabi'i, a follower. And there's other categories as well. The Mukhadram is one that's worth knowing about. It comes from an Arabic word meaning green and verdant and flourishing, and that refers to individuals who overlapped with the Holy Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, during their lifetime, during his lifetime, but never actually met him. Uwais al-Qarni is perhaps the best known of these. So we'll be looking at some of these underestimated names amongst the lady narrators of hadith. And the one I want to speak about today is somebody who bears a title. She is Fatima an-Nabawiyya. Fatima an-Nabawiyya. I like to think of her as that, although she has other titles as well. And very often when you look at the Ahl al-Bayt in particular in early Islam, they are often given names, sometimes because the first name is repeated so often. When I lived in Cairo, one of the great things about the city of Cairo is that quite a lot of the people who are from that early period are associated with places which are believed to be their last resting place. Fatima Nabawiyya is certainly one of them. In the Darb al-Ahmar, it's of course by Allah's honouring of these people that they are buried in the poorest parts of Cairo. It would be mutually very uncomfortable if they were to find themselves amongst the rich, jet-set, secularized Egyptians up on Muqattam Hill or some of the other glitzy suburbs of Cairo. No, they're with the poor. So Fatima an-Nabawiyya is also Fatima bint al-Husayn. She's one of the daughters of Imam al-Husayn, radiallahu an. And we've already, in a longer Paradigms lecture, talked about her sister, Sayyidah Sukaina, and her really extraordinary life, also a very literary figure, but somebody who's involved in the politics of the day. And Fatima, who is born, it is said, in the 3rd decade of the Hijrah, is known and is celebrated amongst the ulama primarily for having narrated some important hadiths from obviously from her father, also from her grandmother, Fatima, radiallahu anha, from Bilal, from Aisha, from Ali Zain al-Abidin, important people in that world. And one of the things that one discovers, well, let's say there are two things that you discover that are quite timely for the Ummah in researching the history of these early hadith narrators, is that the later schismatic instinct to separate them out didn't make any sense to the first generations, and you find Aisha very close to the Ahl al-Bayt, as we'll see with some of the subsequent ladies whom we will be honoured to discuss in this little series. And also that these ladies are formidable and don't really coincide at all with the later, if you like, Taliban type sense of women as being neither seen nor heard, but kind of locked away in a perpetual shadowy barzakh somewhere. The early women of Islam, Aisha is a good example, very much at the forefront of public life and very strong. Reading their biographies, one is reminded of how very strong, passionate these ladies were. So a hadith narrator brought up in the household of Imam al-Husayn, and the time comes for her to marry. Obviously, in Islamic historiography in our history books, enormous significance in who they marry and also how they marry. The story is that one of her relatives, Al-Hassan, not Imam al-Hassan, was invited to Imam al-Husayn's house, and he said, "Which of my two daughters would you wish to marry?" Of course, there is Sayyidah Sukaina and there is Sayyidah Fatima and Nabawiyya, two blazing lights, and he's completely shattered. Istahya al-Hassan, the historians say he's kind of shy, he's overcome with modesty, and where's he going to look? What's he going to do with this situation? So he can't choose, he doesn't know what to say, he's dumbstruck. But Imam al-Husayn gives him Sayyidah Fatima and Nabawiyya. And again, one of the beautiful things you see about these ladies is that the power of their relationships, their fidelity, their strength, the love. You know, they were genuinely, these are people who are obviously in love, even though so much of the lives of early Muslim women is necessarily and appropriately kept private. So she marries this guy and has children by him, including somebody who becomes quite well known in scholarship called Ibrahim al-Qamar. Again, like many of the Ahl al-Bayt, he has a name, Ibrahim the Moon, or perhaps the moon-faced Ibrahim, because as with so many of the Ahl al-Bayt, he was incredibly beautiful. And even Sayyidah Fatima was sometimes compared to al-Hur al-Ain, the celestial maidens of paradise. Physical beauty was something that people were very overcome by. So she has several children, and then her husband Al-Hassan dies. She inherits from him because she's an otherworld-oriented kind of woman. She doesn't keep any of the inheritance, but she just distributes it amongst her children and continues to live in that house in a state of holy poverty, focusing on Quran, narrating hadith, memorization, teaching, and as we'll see later, there's a kind of public ethics, philanthropic aspect to her life as well. So her husband dies, and it's clear that she was totally committed to him and totally in love, because when he dies, she builds, the historians say, a qubba, which probably didn't mean a stone or brick dome like that. Probably it was some kind of tent or rough shelter over the grave, and she spent most of the next year there, sleeping there, reading Quran. She was obviously overwhelmed with grief for her husband, who'd been a very good husband to her. And her mother was not entirely comfortable with this great grief. And after a few months, her mother said, "You should remarry. This is not the best thing." And in order to persuade Fatima to remarry, Fatima's mother stands in the sun next to this qubba, whatever it was. And she stands in the hot sun. An hour goes past, 2 hours pass. And finally, the daughter, realizing that she has a duty to her mother, agrees. And shortly after, she's married again. She marries Abdullah bin Amr bin Uthman bin Affan, in other words, the grandson of the third Khalifa. And again, you see how close the Ahl al-Bayt are with the family of Uthman, with the family of Aisha, this idea that they're kind of two separate sects in Islam at this early period, just not borne out by the genealogies that are there. So she is marrying the grandson of Uthman bin Affan. Again, she has children, and each of them has a story. But then he also dies, so she's a widow, Armala, for the second time. And again, she does the same thing. He's wealthy, Othman's family are landed, and she inherits quite a bit, but again, all goes to the children, which is a useful example for today, I think, that as we tend to get older, and as young people starting out on married life are facing a kind of cliff face economically, finding it very difficult to get onto the property ladder and establishing themselves, it's good for older people to recycle their wealth and to hand it on to their kids rather than they're waiting until the parents are 90 or something and they're 65 and almost on the brink of retirement. The way that these Tabi'in show us is that they trust in Allah and the money goes to the young people who really need it. There's reports of some kind of dissatisfaction because some of her kids have inherited more than others because the first husband is poor, the second husband is wealthy, but she says, I don't want there to be any inequality between my children and I don't want any of them to inherit from somebody who is not their true father. That's how she does it. And then there's the catastrophe of Karbala, which is the great kind of horror of early Islam. And very often we find, as we saw with the story of Sayyidah Sukaina, and both of them were actually physically present, both of the sisters were present at this terrible showdown. Some of the events are actually recorded by the women. She's not hurt, but she's taken afterwards to Yazid's place, and she delivers this beautiful sermon about her loyalty to the Ahl al-Bayt. How could this be done to the grandson of the chosen one, alayhi salatu wasalam? And after some time, this very noble woman sent back to Medina. And the historians recall how Yazid sends a kind of guard with her to make sure there's no kind of political stuff going on, a spy maybe, we don't really know. By the time they get back to Medina, she's talking to her sister and she agrees that this guy, even though he's from the retinue of Yazid, and Yazid has presided over what happened at Karbala, she says it's not right that this guy should not be paid. What have we got? We've just got 2 bracelets. That's all that's left. And so she offers her 2 bracelets to this agent of the state. And he's completely shattered by this. Because the politics are so dire, but still they don't want him to go unrewarded. And he says, no, I did it for the love of the Ahl al-Bayt. He's melted. He doesn't take it. So there's plenty of stories of the non-vengefulness of those people that continue to melt our hearts. So she resumes narrating hadiths and some of the wisdom that we have today and that we celebrate, that has brought tears to the eyes of hadith scholars and hadith listeners and khutbah listeners for 1400 years are with us because of the effort that she made. But there's another thing about her that gives her another title. Fatima an-Nabawiyya is the first one, and the people of Cairo know her as that, the prophetic Fatima, sometimes said because she had physical features that really recollected the Holy Prophet, and particularly her grandmother, Imam al-Husayn always said, you really look like my mother. But also, she has another title, which is Umm al-Yatama, mother of orphans, which doesn't mean the obvious thing, but it means that she established, some of the historians say, the first orphanage in Islam. How did she do this? Because she looked after and took into her care, despite the fact that she had very few resources, 7 of the orphans of Karbala. And then she let others, girls, into her entourage and would travel with them everywhere. It wasn't as if she had a kind of Victorian-style orphanage somewhere on a hill outside Medina and would occasionally go to visit them. No, they were in her house in the traditional Islamic fostering way and were treated as members of the family. It was an orphanage, but it was also just her home. So that's another of her titles, radiallahu anha. She's also called by the historians al-Masakin. There's several women called al-Masakin, mother of the destitute, because her house was known in Medina as a place where you could go to if you really didn't have anything. If you were really completely, hardly had a thread to wear and not a crust, that was the place where you went. And people would say, go to Fatima, go to Fatima's house. So she lives a full life. She dies, historians say, at the age of 90, I guess that's 90 Islamic years, in the year 116, and celebrated and honoured for her extraordinary contributions to scholarship. She's known to have been a waliya, a saint. She's in the books, the Tabaqat al-Awliya, the biographical dictionaries that we have in Islam that list people who are unusually holy and luminous and known for their sainted goodness. This active philanthropy that she practiced, and scholarship. And it's an interesting reflection when people talk about gender issues in Islam, that a hadith narrated by a woman is just as valid as a hadith narrated by a man. It's not as if it's half as valuable or there are problems. Gender has nothing to do with the sihha, the authenticity of a hadith. And how could anybody think otherwise when Aisha radiallahu anha has narrated more hadiths than anyone other than Abu Huraira, the Sahaba, venerated her hadith and venerated the hadith of these other women like Fatima al-Nabawiyya, Fatima al-Masakin, Fatima al-Yatama. So yeah, a rich life, a fearless life, a life that was full of traumas because she was bereaved, she became a widow twice. Those are difficult times, politically very excruciating times, particularly for the Ahl al-Bayt. But she coped, alhamdulillah, and we remember her today as al-Masakin. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this fasting month to grant His grace and mercy to Fatima al-Nabawiyya, to inspire us, women as well as men as well as women, by her example, and help us to be refreshed and revived by the recollection of these people. بِذِكْرِهِمْ تَنْزِلُ الرَّحْمَةِ. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Ramadan provides us with an invaluable opportunity to increase our piety, our God consciousness. It is also an opportune time to give generously in charity. As an independent institution of higher education and a registered charity, our work relies on the generosity of individuals like you. During this blessed month, we ask you to support Cambridge Muslim College. You can do so through regular giving, by becoming a friend or patron, or one-off donations, whatever the amount. This Ramadan, our goal is to make 10,000 new friends. Head to the donate page on our website, become a friend for as little as £5 a month, and help us continue delivering educational programs like this for the wider community, training the next generation of Muslim scholars, thinkers, and leaders.